Well, welcome, folks. Welcome to another episode of Infidelity Recovery. My name is Hassani.
And I'm Danielle Pettiford.
And we are Couples Academy, and it is indeed an honor and a privilege to be with you yet for another night. We're going to be talking about a very important topic tonight, which many of our clients really struggle to figure out how they can overcome, how they can press forward, how they can have healthy relationships. We're talking about triggers.
Yeah.
And how to deal with triggers after infidelity.
Yeah, Hassani and I have a few support groups. We have a men's support group and we have a women's support group. And so in these groups, we have an opportunity to hear what's happening on the battleground, so to speak, of their marriages and the day in and the day out. And so triggers have been a major topic for the women, really, who have experienced infidelity. And they're really struggling with, I want to repair my marriage. I want to work through things. I want this thing to work out. But what do I do when these emotions strike me, when I feel rage, when I feel sadness, when I feel anger? And so we're here to discuss these things and try to give some options for people when they go through these emotions.
I think the first thing we need to do is really define what a trigger is, right? So according to the definition, this is what it says. It's distress, typically as a result of arousing feelings or memories that's associated with a particular traumatic experience. And oftentimes it can lead to extreme anxiety, sorrow, pain, heartbreak, even torment in many cases. And generally, when we hear about post-traumatic stress disorder, because that's really what we're talking about, it is oftentimes associated with war. Just think about people who've gone into battle and they've witnessed death all around them. They've witnessed, explosions and guns being fired. They come back from that experience.
Tics. They have tics.
That's right.
Right. I'll never forget this guy. When I was a young person, I was in the bank. And this guy who everybody knew in the community was in war literally starts screaming and he jumps on the ground as if he was, in the bank, as if he was in the middle of a war. He was literally living it out in his reality. That's what post-traumatic stress disorder does to people.
You know, I kind of like to compare it to slavery, right? Slavery lasted, physical chattel slavery lasted for a particular period of time, but then even after it was abolished, the psychological impact of that experience lasted for generations. And so likewise with war, when the war is over, the impact, the emotional, psychological impact lasts for a long time.
Yeah.
But when it comes to infidelity, there's something called what is it called?
Post-traumatic stress disorder?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's post-infidelity stress disorder.
Yeah.
Right? So that is another catastrophic experience, and there's a long-term emotional impact it can have if you don't do the right things to really recover from it. And I remember one of the men in my men's group said something so incredibly powerful. He said, listen, think about it like this, gentlemen. When we are unfaithful to our spouses, it's equivalent to dropping a bomb and causing a massive explosion and walking away, right? Could you imagine? Think about Hiroshima, Nagasaki. We dropped bombs in Japan, and it led to the death of millions and millions and millions of people. But interestingly enough, many people survived. Now, as horrible as death is, some would say surviving that type of experience is worse because you're forced to live with that pain. And that's why I've heard many people say that infidelity is worse than death, because death is permanent, but infidelity means that you have to carry this around for years and years and years to come. And if you don't have the right coping skills, it could be something that could really rip you apart, rip that relationship apart. And when he said it, it was just like, it was so powerful. So I said, listen, what I want to do for you guys is give you a visual of what that actually looks like. I want you to see what the impact or the aftermath of war looks like, right? And think about this in the context of what a person goes through after they've experienced their traumatic experience with an affair. When I saw this, it was incredibly emotional, and I want you to tell me what you think as you see it. Now, the first time I saw that, I mean, just I don't think that unfaithful partners really realize the negative impact that it has on their spouse when they're unfaithful. And oftentimes, what we tend to do is minimize the impact because we're not feeling what they're feeling.
Yes. How do you recover? Like when you look at that devastation, you realize that the people who were in that environment, they were stuck right there. Like the bomb dropped, the explosion happened, everything tore up and turned into ruins, and they got stuck there. And so there has to be a rebuilding because there's no moving forward. You're stuck there in that moment. And how many people do you know that have experienced any kind of trauma and they always go back to the trauma place because they've never moved forward? And in relationships, even if you split, you always go back to that trauma place. When you go to a next relationship, you're always bringing that trauma with you. What he did to me back in the day, what she did, because you never recovered. So when you start experiencing anything that is anywhere similar to what you experienced, you are triggered and you go right back to this devastation.
Here's a great opportunity to talk to the unfaithful partner because oftentimes they don't know.
Yes.
Share with them what the betrayed spouse deals with because, you know, in the women's group, you have a whole lot of women who are triggered. And let me just say this, just for clarity, men have been the betrayed spouse as well.
Yes.
And we have a lot of men in our group that have experienced the same thing. And when we hear it, it's just fascinating to see just the emotional stress and strain that they go through and what they deal with on a daily basis. Could you unpack for those who have been the perpetrator, if you will, what their spouses go through?
Well, it's like this, you know, it's two different things. You have couples that are together moving forward. They're working on their relationship together. And you would think that it would be perfect. The hurt partner is going through the process. They're forgiving. They're working on healing. Everything's great. She's even given him credit for doing the right things and doing the most. But it could be anything. It could be a scent. It could be a look in his eyes. It could be the way that he, maybe he didn't call when he was supposed to call. Any little thing could cause this emotional setback where it doesn't matter that everything is right. It doesn't matter that he's following the rules to the toe. It doesn't matter. She goes into a place where she literally starts to feel the same emotions that she felt the day that the bomb dropped. So it's not, and it's not like the woman is unaware that she's triggered. She's very much aware that she's triggered and that he may not be doing anything, but the emotion and the feeling is still so strong that it's almost like you're not sure, do I want to deal with this every day? Do I actually want to fight for this marriage knowing that I'm going to deal with triggers no matter what he does? And then you have the other side of it where you have a couple that maybe the spouse isn't 100% on board, or maybe the spouse feels like I've done enough. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Hassani gave me the list of rules to do. I'm following them to the toe. So you need to just get over it. And that compounds the pain because now you're not acknowledging my hurt. You're not acknowledging my pain. I'm living this and feeling this for real, but you want me to just get over it.
Yeah. And I think what's critical to understand, I don't care whether the affair happened a year ago or 10 years ago. As the hurt spouse thinks about it, the thought triggers a negative emotion. And the negative emotion releases chemicals in the body that create stress. So now they're embodying a negative feeling. They're embodying the experience all over again. Now, their subconscious mind does not realize, wait a minute, I'm not going through this right now, but just the thought, just the memory of it triggers to the body, you're going through this.
Yeah.
So in essence, every single time they think this thought and every single time they're triggered, it is as if they're experiencing it all over
for real.
again.
The heart, actually your heart rate increases. You know, you start to feel warm, like you literally feel the emotion like it's happening. I mean, I've been triggered, and you know, triggers happen for so many different reasons. And so I empathize so deeply. Sometimes when I'm hearing the hurts and the pains of the women, I'll come to you and I'll be like, Hassani, these men need to know what's going on because the hurt is so real. And it's something that the emotion that comes upon you, we wish that it was something that we could control and turn off. If we could turn it off, we would turn it off.
Yeah, and I think what's really important for the unfaithful partner to understand, we have a tendency of thinking if we're the ones who have been unfaithful, well, you know what? She's not complaining, so it must be all good. She's not tripping. She's not screaming. She's not yelling. She's not cussing. She seems to be calm and relaxed, so we must be in a good place. And I caution you to think that way. Because listen, as much as she does articulate her pain, rest assured she's thinking it probably 20 times as much as she's articulating it. Yeah. So it is a constant battle that she goes through daily, or he goes through daily. Yeah. And as you say, anything can trigger it. If I'm driving down the highway and I get off at a particular exit, that was the exit where either I found out about it, or this is the turn that he made to go to her woman.
This is the park that they walked in. Yes. Whatever. This was the restaurant that they went to. All of these things are triggers.
You know, I had a couple recently who they just went to a graduation because someone was graduating from college, getting their degree, and it was the graduation party was held in a hotel. Well, that hotel happened to be the place that the unfaithful partner took the affair partner, and it led to a World War III war. And so the question was, well, how do we deal with situations like this when they occur? Well, one of the things you can do is avoid those places. Yeah. Like sometimes you just have to make serious, hard decisions about what's best for you as a couple.
Absolutely. And here's something that the unfaithful partner needs to hear is that the hurt partner has decided to continue to fight for this relationship. And so you know that you're in agreement with that and you're moving forward. But just because you're in agreement to move forward doesn't mean that the hurt partner is able to turn off those emotions, those feelings. And what I hear a lot is that the wives feel like the men want things to go back to exactly the way that they were. And in the process, wives are like shoveling down and pressing down emotions, hurts and pains, just trying to like get along, like moving on to get along. And that hurt partner isn't understanding that, no, I'm still hurt. I'm still in pain. We can't really go back to exactly what it was unless you start making adjustments and helping me to heal. It's impossible for her to heal when she doesn't have your assistance in the process. Yes. You have to work together to heal. It's not all his fault. It's not all, or whoever's the hurt partner, okay? It's not one-sided is the point. The point is that in order for you to move forward, both of you have to work towards helping each other heal.
Here's the reality. The betrayed partner is what we will call the obsessor. They're the ones who's constantly obsessing about what happened. They're analyzing, they're reanalyzing, they're very hypervigilant. They have a need to know. They want to know all the details, all the facts, even if it's to their own demise. Right. Like they just have to know. Right. Because you have to understand.
Oftentimes it is to their demise.
Oftentimes it is. Yes, it is. And not everybody is wired to know. Some people need to know because they find breakthrough and clarity in that and they can move forward. Right. Other people, you know the expression, curiosity killed the cat.
They need to know, but when they know, then it's devastating and it doesn't help.
So we need to be careful what we share. But the point is, they have a need to know. And so oftentimes, they're always, and think about it, the brain, there's like 3 buttons in our minds. You have a record button, a rewind button, and a playback button. And oftentimes we record the traumatic experience and we rewind the tape and play it back. Yeah. And then once it's done, we rewind the tape and play it back. And that sends us on almost like a detective mission to find out all the details and all the facts, and we need to know everything. And what happens in that process is it can cause that relationship to unravel, because as I'm possessive and as I need to know, I'm dealing with a partner who just wants to suppress. So if the hurt partner is the obsessor, the unfaithful partner is the suppressor. And the suppressor is the individual that doesn't want to talk about it. Right. They just want to move forward. They minimize what really happened by using terms like, it was only, I didn't really care. It was just, and so when you do that, what it does is it negatively impacts the partner, because it says you're minimizing what I've maximized in my heart and in my mind. I can't deal with it, and I need you to feel what I feel. I need you to make this big like I'm making this big, because I need your help in recovering. And what happens is the person just wants to do away with it, move forward, redirect the blame, shift blame on other people, and not take personal responsibility for what they've done. And so it's hard for a hurt partner to heal when they have an unaccountable, betrayed partner who doesn't do what's necessary to help them reach emotional restoration.
Absolutely. I know that the wives, any wife that's on here in the group is like, yes, amen, talk about it. Yes.
And so here's the other piece. A person who does not want to talk about what happened, okay, they redirect. They so what happens is the hurt partner is asking the same question 1,000 different ways to get to the truth,
right.
or they're asking 1,000 different questions and getting nothing. And so there's a shroud of secrecy that takes place because when you think about an affair, one of the major components of an affair is secrecy, right? Which is deceit. So if I'm still secretive, if I'm still deceptive after the affair, well, what hope does the betrayed partner have to believe that things can get better? Because you're still operating the way you operated when you were involved in the relationship. And what happens is secrecy fuels the obsession that the hurt partner has to know. So if you're able to have open, honest, transparent conversations, it allows both partners to release the pain.
I agree. And I also think there's a point that needs to be recognizes that a lot of times it's perceived secrecy because the partner that cheated oftentimes feels exhausted by the questions. Like we've talked about this already. We've gone through our intensive. We've already did the expose. We've written the forgiveness letter. Like, I just want this to be done with. And so it's not that always that there are details being hidden. It's more so that the person is exhausted of it being thrown in their face. So yeah, they want to suppress it because they're going through their own level of pain, having to face it and deal with it over and over again. And so there's this like whole conversation that needs to be had to help balance it out so that both of you can actually work together and heal, because there's two people in pain here.
True. Now, I will say this, going back to the hurt partner and what they need. Think about it like this. If you've ever been in science class, right, and you open up a science book and you see a skeleton, so you know what the structure of the body is by the bones. Well, sometimes they'll take a transparency, put it on top of that, and now you can see the veins of that human body or that cadaver. Then they put another transparency on top of that, and now you can see the organs and where they're placed. And then you put another transparency on top of that, and then you see the skin, right? And then you put another transparency on top of that, and then you see the clothes. The point is there are layers or levels of conversation that you need to go through.
Right.
So maybe the first time I asked the question, I wanted to know the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, which speaks to the facts.
Yeah.
So now I've got the facts. I've played detective. But now I need to go introspective. I now need to know the why.
Nice.
So I may ask the same questions, right? It's the same question, but there's a different level of understanding. And so now that I understand the why, I may ask the same questions again, because now I'm looking at that question from a different perspective. I want to know about the affair partner and the relationship you have with them. I want to know then through the same questions, well, where were we when you were involved in this affair? And so sometimes we're asking the same question because we're looking at it from a different perspective, and the unfaithful partner doesn't know what we're doing or what that person is doing, and it becomes very frustrating. And so that's why it's important to preface these conversations with an explanation of why it is we want to know what these details are. And then I would also suggest take out your cell phone, folks. When you take out your cell phone, you actually have a recording device. We encourage couples to record the conversations because it's better to listen to the conversation you had 1,000 times than having the same conversation 1,000 times,
Marco Polo,
which creates frustration.
Great
Marco
tool.
Polo,
Great tool.
Phenomenal
Hard to
tool.
argue on there.
Exactly. You can't talk over each other. You can't, because the system is not designed to do that. And couples who have used Marco Polo as a tool have significantly impacted the quality of their communication.
What do we do about flashbacks? Because for me, my experience with flashbacks is that you literally don't even have any control over it. And you will actually have a vision of the hurt, whether you created it yourself, whether your mind created it itself. So you actually have a vision of what you think went down, or you actually saw something, you read something, you have text message that was evidence, you caught a conversation, all these things come back as a flash, and it's like you're being assaulted by your own mind. What do we do about that?
Well, we need to, first of all, a flashback is a trigger.
Yes.
But let's unpack the trigger. Let's look at the anatomy of a trigger. A lot of times people associate a thought with a trigger, and it is associated, but oftentimes we make it synonymous. So if a thought comes to my mind about what my partner did, or I'm imagining what I can't prove that my partner did, The thought in itself is not the trigger. My emotional reaction to the thought becomes the trigger. And so the reality is, once you've learned something, it's hard to unlearn what you've learned. Meaning, once the thought is in your head, it's in your subconscious mind. It's a thought that you'll remember forever. Unless you go and have some type of freak accident and you have brain damage and you lose memory in your brain, I don't think the thought will ever go away or the memory will ever go away. But how you deal with that thought and memory will determine whether it's truly a trigger. So you can think a thought and not be triggered by it. And so if you look at it from that perspective, you can take control over your emotional reaction through practice, through repetition. Now, it's not easy. It doesn't happen right away.
No, it does not.
It takes work.
Yes, it does.
And we don't want to give the impression as, oh, just do that. No, it's a process. Repetition is the mother of all learning. And the more you do something, the better you get at it. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I think about how the more that you combat it, so you try to, kind of control the thoughts that you're having or shut them down, as the word says, that you capture your mind, your thoughts, and you bring them into subjection to what the word of God says. And that's really been how I've managed flashbacks, because it's something that you can't control. So it comes upon you. And although you can't control the flashback when it happens, the more that you combat it with the tools, knowing what to do, it's almost like after a while, when those images come to your mind, it doesn't affect you in the same way. And then they start to come to your mind less frequently. Because I'm sitting here thinking about, triggers that I've had in the past that would just literally, when the thought would come upon me, my heart would beat like it's happening right now. And I would have to deal with that. And I would have to, give the thought to the Lord. And people say, I've prayed, I've done that, I've given it back to the Lord. And well, you give it back to him and then you kind of take it back, because what happens is there's a part of us that sometimes enjoys like being angry about and stewing in thoughts. And so we allow ourselves to stew on the thought, what they did to me, they shouldn't have done it. And so now we're feeding into that flashback when we could have captured it and shut it down. And so it's a practice that you have to continue to implement continuously until it fades. And it will fade. It does fade. It just takes time. And it takes repetition and practice for those emotions to fade away. Because I can think about some things that were some major triggers right now I'm like, wow, I can't believe I haven't thought about that in years.
So you're talking about thought shifting. When a thought comes into your mind that's negative, if you think on it long enough, it's going to create a negative emotion. Truth be told, everybody who's watching this video right now, if you as an exercise were to think about the most painful experience that you've ever had in your life, and you truly go in on that thought, it's going to change your physiology. It's going to change your emotional state. And now it's almost like, to what we said before, you're experiencing it all over again. Yeah. But now if I were to say, listen, think about the most joyful, positive, wonderful experience you've ever had in your life. And if you think about it long enough, your physiology
you'll start to smile.
You're smiling. Yeah. You feel lighter. And so this proves that thoughts impact emotions. So when you're feeling negative, ask yourself, well, what am I thinking that's creating that feeling and emotion? Yeah. The fact is, we think 50 to 60,000 thoughts per day. But there are those dominating thoughts that we're not even aware of that we're thinking that's creating our emotional state of being. And so you really have to begin to journal. So we talked about what we can do. Yeah. The first thing you need to do is journal. Have a thought journal. Every time a negative thought comes to you, every time a trigger comes to you, write it down.
Right. Well, and I've shared this with ladies about the whole journaling. So, it's difficult because when these triggers happen, because we're not even talking about flashbacks right now. We're talking about, I'm triggered now because of something he said or she said, a certain look, a certain attitude, a certain gesture or lack thereof. In the moment where I'm triggered by you, do I journal?
Well, hold on one second. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So what we're doing, hopefully we're talking to people right now who aren't triggered at this very moment. Right. So we're giving you tips on what to do when you experience a trigger. Right. So the first thing I would say, when you're not triggered, write down what all your triggers are. So you have to become self-aware.
Yes.
The reality is, you may continue to add to your trigger list because something new triggers you. Right. Well, write it down. What is the benefit of having a long laundry list of triggers? Well, if you take the time to do the work.
You have to do the work.
And review your triggers often, now you go into your day saying, there are landmines all around me.
Yes.
And because I've reviewed these triggers, I know what to watch out for. So in essence, I can, here we go, predict my flashbacks, because if I know exit 3 on Route 85 will create a flashback, let me go to exit 5. So I'm predicting that this is going to happen if this occurs. So I'm going to come up with something different, right? Which will allow me to overcome the possibility of experiencing that trigger. So predict your flashbacks, predict your triggers. The second thing is avoid your triggers, as we just said. And then the third thing is, listen, the fact is,
can we add a piece about the avoiding the triggers, that this is a great place to talk to your spouse? Because if you have your list of triggers, and now we're talking about avoiding the triggers, our spouse needs to know what those triggers are and help us avoid the triggers. They have to participate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because here's the reality. Certain triggers have absolutely nothing to do with your spouse in the moment. And other triggers have everything to do with your spouse, because you're triggered by your spouse.
Exactly.
When your spouse does this, you're triggered. When they're on their phone for too long, you're triggered. When they stretch and yawn a particular way for whatever reason, you're triggered. When they're watching a certain television show. Like, for instance, if I'm triggered by the thought of a sex scene on a television show,
go there.
But now you could watch it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm thinking, well, what? You should be triggered like I'm triggered. Like, I'm offended that you would even watch something like this. And now this makes me question you and where your mind is. And so are you back to your old ways? Are you thinking the way you thought before? I'm triggered by you.
Yeah.
And so it's important that couples have these conversations.
And they have to be sensitive to it, because there was an offense, people. So
there was a traumatic experience.
Yes, so you cannot go back to the way it was. If your spouse is triggered by the fact that you are watching a movie that has a salacious scene, you can't watch salacious scenes around your spouse. It's that simple. Yeah. You can't think that it's not fair. It's not fair that your spouse has to go through this process at all. It's not fair at all. If it were their way, they would never have had to experience any of this. They would never have to call a couples academy. They would never have to walk through all these steps. So you have to be sensitive to what is triggering your spouse and acknowledge that triggers are real. Because a lot of the partners that have cheated are not acknowledging these triggers as real.
Very true. It's like implausible deniability. But here's the deal. When you share your trigger list with your partner, please do it in a non-emotional state. Because when you inject emotion into a conversation, you go from 0 to 100 real quick. It's not going to solve or resolve anything, because now when emotion takes place, there's no logic and reason, because emotions aren't logical.
The list is out the door. Everything's out the door.
It's completely out the door. And that's why you want to journal, because it's almost like, here's a good example. So in the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, there's a chapter, the first chapter, that talks about how you shouldn't complain, you shouldn't criticize, and you shouldn't condemn. And it gives a story about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was known for being very critical. And he would criticize publicly a lot of his opponents. And it got him in trouble to the point where someone wanted to have a duel to the death because they were impacted by what he said. And so that taught him a very powerful lesson. From that point forward, he never publicly criticized again. But what he would do is he would write letters, expressing his criticism, and never mail them. It was his way of releasing all of the feelings and the angst that he had about a situation, and he would tell people off on paper and never put it in the mail. And so I say that as an example to say, rather than dumping and going ham on your partner, use journaling as an opportunity to really release your most uncensored thoughts, feelings, and emotions on paper. Pause, read it, gain insight, clarify your points of view, and then in a non-emotional state, then share it with your partner, so that now your partner can show up in an empathetic and sympathetic way to the situation. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
It makes logical sense.
It makes logical sense. And but we got people all in the middle. We got flesh all in the middle of this. That need to actually understand that these tools and these practices work if you work it. You know, it's two people that have decided to move forward after infidelity, and you want to move forward and you want to clean up all this rubbish and all this disaster, like that video that Hassani showed. You know, he had mentioned that people actually still lived after that, and they actually lived in the ruins. Can you imagine the people that lived in the ruins after the destruction? How are they eating? They're starving. Where did they get water? Everything that they knew, running water is gone. Toilet paper is gone. Like, you know, and so you have to put these principles in place so that you guys can begin to rebuild, and you've got to do it together.
Let me give them one more tool, right, before we close, because we've gone beyond 30 minutes.
Did we tell them that this is a series?
Well, we're about to.
Oh, okay.
So at this point, if you have a trigger in the moment, sometimes you just have to ride the wave. Riding the wave means when you're in the midst of it and you're trembling and you're angry and you're frustrated and you're breathing fire, ride it out.
Breathe it out.
Ride it out. Just go all the way into that emotion. Now, try not to do it in front of your partner. Try not to do it where it's destructive, but ride out the emotion, because eventually it will dissipate. If you think about a crashing wave, they could be very violent, but eventually over the course of time, that wave becomes smaller and smaller until it dissipates into the rest of the water. And so people who attempt to fight the feeling, to go against the emotion, do themselves more harm than good. And so there's something powerful called the law of accumulation. So in essence, when emotions accumulate up in your body to a certain degree, if you don't filter them out, those emotions can be very destructive. Think about water that accumulates to a huge mass. Water can become very destructive. It can remove a house from its foundation and it float down the street. Yeah. Right? Electricity, if it accumulates to a certain amount, that electricity could literally kill people. But if it's sifted out properly, electricity is used to turn lights on, is used to power engines. Water sifted out properly, you can wash with it, you can bathe with it, you can cook with it. Likewise, emotions, when you sift it out properly, can be constructive instead of destructive. So you got to learn how to ride that wave out and allow those emotions to just release.
Yeah, and you know, a great example of that is a couple that has been going strong in the process, and they're walking together, and they're on the path, but then something happens in the relationship. They get to a point where they have a moment where they are enraged, and they're thinking about, I can't believe that I actually had to go through that. And so even though they were walking the walk and everything was great for the longest, suddenly you question, can I do this? Like suddenly you are experiencing triggers when you thought you were doing okay. You know, it could have just been a thought, like, why did he or she choose that person? What did I do wrong? And I actually forgave that. I'm actually here. Like the fact that I actually am here, and let them get away with that. You know, these triggers come up. So it's a wave. And it's a wave in the process of your healing, because your journey is way down the road. Like your journey is all the way down there. And on the way, you're going to have these ups and you're going to have all these downs. And so we got to recognize when we're just going through one of these ripples, and we put these practices in place so that we can ride it out. And once it gets back smooth, we can keep on going. But this is not where we throw in the towel.
At all. We have to understand that setbacks are inevitable. When you are first triggered, because when you first discover something, you're triggered every single day, probably hundreds of times a day. And then over time, those triggers begin to slow down. So you go from being triggered 20 times a day to 10 times a day, to 5 times a day, to 5 times a week, to 5 times a month, to 5 times a year. Now, some would say, wow, 3 weeks we're doing good, and all of a sudden out of nowhere we're watching TV and you're triggered, and now we're in a fight again.
Yes.
And many people look at that as a setback, but let me just say, actually that's progression, because if you go back 3 weeks ago, those triggers were popping off every other second. And so after they say it takes upwards of 2 years to heal from the pain of an affair if you're doing the necessary work. So let's just say a year and a half goes by. We're in a better place. We're doing good. We're chilling. We're vacationing. We're having a good time. Intimacy's back, great communication, and there's a trigger, and boom, it's just like we set ourselves all the way back. We need to understand that a relapse is not a collapse. Just because I'm relapsed, I go through a relapse, it doesn't mean that the whole foundation has collapsed and we're at ground zero again. No, because hopefully you've learned how to communicate, you've learned certain skills, you have empathy and sympathy, and you know now what to do to quickly recover when a relapse takes place.
Wow.
And
that's
so
where
when
we
you
need to go.
yeah.
Yeah.
And when you begin to do that, everything begins to change. Listen, we could talk all night, but this is a series. We want to spend a couple of weeks really unpacking triggers and how to deal with them. But you are watching Couples Academy. Now, if you are in a relationship and you've just experienced an affair, or maybe it's happened years ago and you haven't really recovered, go to www.couplesacademy.org, sign up for a free discovery session, take advantage of the services because it can truly tremendously heal your relationship and restore your family.